Um, tonight's reading will be found in the book of Luke, the 6th chapter. We'll be reading from verse 1 to verse 11, and I will be reading in isiZulu. Luke chapter 6, from verse 1 to 11. UJesu ucacisa umyalelo weSabatha. Kwathi ngeSabatha wadabula amasimu, abafundi bakhe bakha izikhwebu, badla bezihlikihla ngezandla. Kepha abathile babaFarisi bathi, nenzelani lokho okungavunyelwe ngeSabatha na? UJesu abaphendule wathi, anifundanga yini ngalokho akwenza uDavide mhla elambile yena nababe naye, ukuthi wangena endlini kaNkulunkulu, wathatha izingwa zokubukwa ezingavunyelwe ukudliwa umuntu ngabapristi bodwa, wadla wanika nababe naye na? Wathi kubo, indodana yomuntu iyinkosi neyeSabatha. Kwathi-ke ngelinye iSabatha wangena esinagogeni, wafundisa. Kwakukhona umuntu lapho osandla sakhe sokunene sasishwabene. Ababhali nabaFarisi bamqaphelisisa ukuthi uyaphilisa yini ngeSabatha ukuze bathole ukumbeka icala. Kepha wazazi izizindlo zabo, wathi kuyo indoda esandla sishwabene, sukuma ume phakathi. Wasukuma-ke wema. UJesu wathi kubo, ngiyanibuza ukuthi kuvunyelwe ngeSabatha ukwenza okuhle noma okubi yini, ukusindisa umuntu noma ukumbulala na? Esebaqalazile bonke, wathi kuye, yelula isandla sakho, wenze njalo-ke, saze saphiliswa isandla sakhe. Bese bagcwala ukuhlanya, bakhuluma bodwa ngokuthi bangamenze njani uJesu. Leli izwi lenkosi. Amen. Guys, please do stay tuned after the sermon for a Q&A session, and yeah, we'll be taking any questions that you guys have. So if you have any questions during the sermon, you can jot them down, and afterwards you'll be able to ask those questions. Sibonga, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Sisi. Can you guys hear me well? Can everybody hear? Just thumbs up if you can, thumbs down if you can't. Steven, I don't see your thumbs, so I'm not too sure. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Right, thank you. So I have a very different setup today. So that means if I'm looking at the screen, that's where I'll be looking. But when I'm looking at you guys, I'll be looking here. So if you see me looking at like this, I'm looking at you. I'm facing the camera this way. So just bear with me in that one. How's everybody doing? I hope we all had a good week. I hope we all had yeah, how's everybody doing? So as I was just thinking through today's passage, I was just reminiscing about my life when I was still in the university. And as a student, there was nothing that excited me more than an email that said the lectures are cancelled. I hope we all had those emails once or twice at least. I had a lot of those. So that free time to get away from schoolwork, and even just for a day or an hour, or just that one lecture that I missed, it felt amazing. So here's my question for you today before we start. Why do you think people are excited about holidays? Or why do you think people get excited when the meeting is cancelled? Why do people look forward to the weekend? So just take a second and just try and think through that. Why are people excited about the holidays? Why do people get excited when meetings are cancelled? Or why do we look forward to the weekend? Right. I hope I'm not the only one who get excited by these things. We all do, right? It would be a shame if I was the only one. We all are excited about this, at least in some ways. So when you have a downtime or a day off where you can rest without guilt or constant worry about that assignment that you need to do or that task that needs completion, where you can actually hang out with your friend, with your family, or start that series that you've been meaning to start, or just sleep without an alarm to wake you up. But in a sense, we are all desiring that time where we are off our duties and our normal responsibilities. Could that be because we all desire and want rest, or because we actually do need to rest? We do need at some time to get away from our stress of work and school and just rest. So in today, we'll see that rest is not just a human need, but it is something that God is really concerned about. As we look in today's passage, Luke is wanting to show us where true rest is actually found. So in this passage, we see the interaction between Jesus and the teachers of the law. So as they engage about the Sabbath, which is the day that God had instructed the Israelites to cease from work and all other things, to focus on him and worship him. So let's look at the passage. Let's look at verse 1 and 2. Reading from NIV, it says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain field, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, why are you doing what is unlawful on a Sabbath? So Luke picks up the story of Jesus as he's walking through the grain field with his disciples. And while he's walking down, Luke is telling us that it was on a Sabbath. So for them to eat, they were plucking off the heads of the grain and eating the kernels. The Pharisees see this, what the disciples were doing, and they go to Jesus and ask, why are your disciples doing what is wrong on a Sabbath? Now you might be wondering, hold on, what wrong did the disciples do here? Now, according to the Pharisees, they'd broken a lot of Sabbatical laws just that day. The Pharisees were the teachers of the law, and they knew the law, and they were determined in keeping it. So this is the law that came from God through Moses and given to the Israelites. It said that 6 days you shall work, you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall cease from work. Now for the Pharisees, this was a problem because the law was not explicit. They needed exact list of things to do and not to do. And this law seems to be an issue because it left a lot of room for error. So they started designing and listing rules of what to do and what not to do to help them make sure that they don't break the Sabbath law. So these rules that they've created, they enforce them on men as if they were actually from God. And this, in some extent, became a burden to people. So God had designed this day to bring rest and enjoyment for his people, but instead the Pharisees have changed them and it became a burden to people. Do you see how something good that God had designed for his people had turned bad? Just like the Pharisees, isn't it our tendencies to turn something good that God has given us and turn it to something bad, something that God has given us for comfort, for joy, the good gifts that God gives to mankind. We have them in our hand and they become tools that we use to control people, assert authority, and so on. And this is exactly what we see here, right? We see Jesus and his disciples, as the Pharisees come to him, they see Jesus and his disciples eating the kernels and they ask him, how dare you and your disciples not conform to our laws and standards that we've set? This was a real concern for them. So this man called Jesus seemed not to care about how things are normally done around here. As we see, this wasn't the first time that Jesus is neglecting their laws and their standards. Mind you, he's not rejecting or neglecting God's law. He's rejecting the law that was made by the Pharisees. So Luke at least records for us two encounters before the passage today. The first one that they had with Jesus was he ate and drank with the tax collectors. The second one, they were troubled by how Jesus' disciples have the tendencies to feast and not to fight. Not to fast. So while all of their disciples and John's disciples will fast, Jesus' disciples did not fast. And this was an issue. And today's passage, Jesus again is permitting his disciples to break the Sabbath laws that they've made. In their minds, clearly, Jesus is not from God. This man is not from God. If he is, why isn't he doing things like we do? So at the defense of his disciples, Jesus, as he normally would, asked them, "Have you not read?" Let's look at verse 3. Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions, when he was hungry, he entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for the priest to eat, and he also gave to some of his companions." Now, I know what you might be thinking. What? Why is Jesus bringing this story? This is a very confusing story for Jesus to bring up. What does this story have to do with the Sabbath? And of course, how does this help his disciples who are in question about the Sabbath here? Let's look at the story that Jesus is taking from. So this is the story of David that is found in 1 Samuel chapter 21. It's quite a long story, so I'll try and just summarize for us. David in this story is running away from King Saul, who's trying to kill him. And with the help of his best friend, Jonathan, he escaped the attempted murder. He flees from the king's palace, and now David is on the run. He has no food, he has nothing to drink, and he's deserted. So he goes on to the priest, Ahimelech, in a place called Nob, in desperation need for food. He tells him that he's on a special mission from the king. And he required food, which seems to be a lie. The priest is hesitant on giving David the bread because they were only meant for the priest, but he ends up giving it to him, provided he had kept himself clean and with the people whom he was with. So David eats the bread and he gives those who are with him, and he leaves the priest. That's the story that Jesus is giving to the Pharisees. Again, you're probably thinking, what exactly is going on here? How does this help with anything? Instead, I feel like it's even more confusing than the initial question that they had. Why would Jesus bring a story about David while he's in question about the Sabbath? See, what Jesus is doing here, he's giving them something to go and reflect about. So upon reflection, there seems to be a lot of different thoughts to what Jesus meant here. So possibly the Pharisees respected David and didn't find him at fault here. So maybe Jesus is trying to show how they're inconsistent with their accusation, how they accuse him and his disciples and not David and his companions. And if Jesus, who broke the law according to them, then David must have also broken the law, which he clearly did, according to what Jesus is saying. But still, that wouldn't help Jesus now, would it? For instance, we don't have this in scripture, but for instance, if they actually did admit that David was wrong, and they said, yes, we do see that our forefather David was wrong, does that mean that Jesus and his disciples were also wrong? If that's what Jesus is doing there, he's compelled then to admit that he's also wrong. So I think there's something more that's going on here in this passage. Let's look at it closely again. We have David, who is the anointed, not yet crowned king, chosen by God. And he's on the run from Saul, the authority of the day, who in his mind, he's keeping God's law when he chases David and kills the priest Ahimelech. Do you see it? Jesus is the anointed king, the Messiah, who is not yet crowned. He's up against the religious authorities of the time. He's going to be killed by the Pharisees because they think they are keeping God's law by killing him because he's a blasphemer. We saw this last week because he claimed to be a person who can forgive sins. Who can forgive sins but God? So to them, they were justified the same way Saul was justified in his heart. So Jesus, after giving them something to reflect on, he goes on to make a very big claim. Look at verse 5. Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." Last week we saw that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins. As if that wasn't big enough, he goes on to make such a very huge claim. The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. See, Jesus is in question here about his disciples breaking the law of the Sabbath. What does he do? He comes and concludes with, he is the Lord of the Sabbath. Do you see what's going on here? Do you see what Jesus is doing here? He's redirecting their understanding of Sabbath and rest. He's pointing to himself as the Lord of rest. And all of these laws that they have made can't give them rest. Instead, they burden them. But only he can give rest because he is the Lord of the Sabbath. Now, if we read somewhere in the New Testament, Paul talks about this in Colossians. He says how all things were just a shadow of what was to come, but reality is found in Christ. So according to Jesus, the Sabbath was just a shadow. So according to Paul, the Sabbath was just a shadow pointing to something great, or maybe even someone greater. It was meant to point people to Christ, who gives people rest. There's something I want us to realize here. Jesus does not downplay the need for rest. Instead, he's redirecting our focus and understanding of where rest is actually found. This is because he knows we all need rest. We are wired like that. Our bodies, our hearts, our minds, they yearn and long for rest. We all need rest. So my question to you today is, where do you find rest? In a world that seems to have a lot of places to rest, some look to social media. The Pharisees, they look to their religion. Where do you look for rest? Friends, I want to invite you today to come and look at the one who claims to be the Lord of it, the one who promises to give rest. The very thing that you're looking for, the very thing that we all desire, Jesus has come to give. He's willing to be arrested and to be killed by the Pharisees so that we can have rest. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the Sabbath. He has come to give us rest. Now, as we're reading and we're going through the passage, you might be asking yourself, wait, hold on, but why is the Sabbath such a big deal to the Pharisees? Why do they make such a big deal? Why do they create so much laws around it? It's because when God gave the Israelites the law in Deuteronomy 5, he says, and I quote, "Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath." Friends, do you realize that do you realize why the Pharisees were so determined on keeping the Sabbath and even going to an extent of adding and creating so much rules? In their heads, it's because they understood and they knew what God had done for them. How he, with his mighty hand, he had taken them out of slavery in Egypt. So it was a big deal to them. This is the same reason why rest in Christ is such a big deal to us. There is rest in Christ because he freed us from the slavery of sin. With a mighty hand, he freed us from sin and he kept us out of sin. That's good news, right? That's good news for those who are trusting in Jesus. But what does it mean for you? What does it mean for you today? Because if you're not trusting in Jesus, my friend, you are a slave to sin. There is no rest for you. Now that means all the efforts, all the rest that you put in weekly, all the hard work that you do, you put in your work so that you could retire early, won't save you from the enslavement of sin. And let me tell you, being a slave to sin is way worse than anything you could ever imagine. But this Jesus right here, he promises rest. He promises ultimate rest. The rest that is for your soul. Now, he's willing to be arrested and killed so that we could have rest. You see how serious he is? So we as students who work so hard to finish on record time so we can get enough rest from school, or how we as workers work so hard so that we can retire early and we could spend the remainder of our lives resting and doing nothing. But if you're not free from sin, is that really rest? Let me tell you something today. God, who had wired us for rest, decides what rest is, not us. We are not the one who decide what rest is. And he says that rest is freedom from sin, and it can only be found in him. So as we continue, Luke wants us to see that Jesus is not only is only the one who knows where rest is and how rest is found. But Luke continues with the story. He's taking us to a different day, a different Sabbath. And just like the first few verses that we read, the first encounter, he shows us again the interaction between Jesus and the teachers of the law. Let's look at verse 6. It says, on the Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. There's something really interesting here about the Pharisees. Do you see it? You see how they watched him closely to see if he would heal on a Sabbath? They tried to find accusation against him. This felt like a trap. This felt like this was planned. Now, it seemed like from verse 1 to 5, in the first interaction, it might have just happened that they bumped into Jesus as they were walking. But this time around, no, this was a plan. They had planned this. And the Bible doesn't tell us, but I will assume that even the man with the shriveled head was planted by them just to see if is really Jesus going to heal that man. And hopefully they would catch me in act breaking the man-made Sabbath rules. Do you see how they didn't care about the man who's needing healing from Jesus? How their consent was just about catching Jesus, not the man. Now, Jesus knew this, and he knew what they were thinking. Do you want to pause there for a second and just think about that? Do you understand that Jesus wasn't predicting what they were thinking? He didn't guess it. He knew what they were thinking. Jesus knows our thoughts. He knows my thoughts. He knows yours too. He's very much aware of our thoughts. So he was with their thoughts. Just before the encounter, Jesus was correcting their view on the Sabbath, and he was pointing to himself as the Lord of the Sabbath. But let's look at what he's saying in this passage. He says in verses 9, then Jesus said to them, I ask you, which is lawful to do on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? So Jesus just moves from telling them that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, and is now showing the real intention of the Sabbath, which was to show us that God cares about life. He cares about our rest. He cares about our salvation. But the Pharisees have missed that. They've become more concerned about the laws that they've made in keeping them than what God had intended the Sabbath for. And this is a real question that Jesus is posing, that Jesus is asking them. Which is lawful to do on the Sabbath? To save life or to destroy it? Now, friends, Jesus is very much qualified to ask this question because Jesus has actually come to save life. He has come to do what's good. Right after asking them, he then goes on to show them what he considers good. It's as if Jesus is saying here, if I'm the Lord of the Sabbath, then I'm the one who decides what the Sabbath should look like. And this is how the Sabbath should look like. Look at verse 10. He looked around them and then said to the man, stretch out your hand. He did so, and his hand was completely restored. Just take a moment and think about this man. Think about how it must have been for him. What do you think his desire was? Now, as he stood in front of Jesus and the Pharisees, do you think this man would have wanted Jesus to keep the man-made laws? I don't think so. I think this man wanted his hand to be restored. And that's exactly what Jesus gives him. He restores his hand. Now, interestingly enough, look at verse 11. Look at how the Pharisees respond. Verse 11 says, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. They were furious and discussed what they might do to Jesus. He just saved a man. See, they had enforced the laws about rest, but they didn't really know or care about people's rest. So that when Jesus is actually restoring someone who needed restoration and rest, they got angry. To them, the rules about rest had become more important than people that God had designed rest for. But not to Jesus. He cared about that man. He cares about you. He just didn't come to give us rest, but he also came to give us restoration. How amazing it is that when we come to Jesus, we have our sins forgiven. He gives us not only just rest, but he restores us. Now Luke in this passage is wanting us to see how Jesus is the fulfillment of the Sabbath and how he has come to give rest and restoration. This man's restoration points to something greater. It points to the hope that is to come, where God will restore all things the way they were supposed to be. And we can trust and rest assured that this current world, as we know it, it will come to pass. But there's also some good news and great news. Jesus has already done the now part. He had died on the cross and redeemed us and restored us back to God. Like how we were meant to be from the beginning, in good relationship with God. Now, as we wait for this world to be restored, we wait in Him, redeemed, rested, and restored. Now, this has major implications for all of us here today who are listening. If you're trusting in Jesus, you are like, if you're not trusting in Jesus, sorry, you're like that man with a shriveled hand. Just like him, you might have accepted that it's okay for you to live like this, to live a life away from God. And you may even think that's normal, but the truth, it's not. And Jesus has come to restore you, to redeem you, and to give you rest. Won't you trust Jesus today? He's the only one who knows how life is supposed to be like. And also, just like the Pharisees, all of the things that you have created for yourself to give you rest don't actually give you rest, at least not like Jesus. He died for you. He gave up his life so that you and I can be restored back to where we were meant to be. And that is in good relationship with God. And he did that with his blood on the cross. Now, the reason why all of these things don't give us rest is because they were not meant to. They were meant to point us to Jesus. Our rest is found only in Christ. Now, for you who's already trusting in Jesus, this should comfort you that as we see Jesus restoring things in the now, everything will be restored at the end. Creation, people, the world as we know it will be free from sin. So that means if you're struggling with sin, with pain, take comfort that all of this is temporal and it's fleeting. Now, as the Holy Spirit helps us to fight against sin and comforts us in our pain, we have a very great hope that we have a home that looks nothing like this, where our Lord Jesus Christ will be our eternal rest, our Sabbath forever. Amen.
Siyabonga ubhuti uSibonga for teaching us God's word namhlanje ebusuku. Before we move to our Q&A, I have a few announcements to make. Just a reminder that next week, this coming week, Good Friday, we will be having sermon hour. So if you guys are able to join us, please do join us. Normal time from 6 to 7. And on Mondays, we have Equip from 5 p.m. to 6:30. Yes, 6. For those of you who do not know what Equip is, basically, we are just being taught how to handle God's word and how to share it with others using biblical tools. So if you guys are able to join us, please do join us, and please do invite others to join as well. On Mondays, we have our devotionals. Please be on the lookout for that on our social media platforms. For Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, we are the Bible Talks UKZN. Yes, that's it. Now we move to questions. If you guys have any questions, please.
One more announcement.
Yes, Kwazi.
I thought you'd be seeing it on the screen. Top tips. We're still taking tips from the students. So if you have any tips about how to be doing studies under COVID, please do drop us a message, or just, I'll send a link on the chat, or you can find it on our social media platforms. We'd really value your inputs, just so we can help the new students to do best for their studies. Thanks, Leander.
Thank you for that. Any questions regarding our sermon tonight? We have Sibonga, the bishop, to answer.
The bishop of Ken.
You guys are welcome to send your questions via chat if maybe you are shy to use the mic. Guys.
I will buy chocolate for anyone who asks the first question. Ben.
Ben has a question. Yes, Ben.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sure. Now, I guess there is wisdom in resting in our normal work. So practically, like how would you apply like just the concepts of rest, literal physical rest, or like tying it to maybe biblical principle and resting from work and all of that? I hope I'm clear in what I'm asking, and I'll get my chocolate.
Okay. Do you want to repeat your question, please?
So what place does the rest have, or what advice does the Bible give on practical rest from our day-to-day work? How do we factor that into our lives?
Okay. I do think, practically speaking, first of all, as human beings who were designed by God, we are designed in the image of God, and well, unlike God, we do get tired and we do fail. But we know that in the beginning, God created the world in 6 days, and then he took the seventh day to rest. So rest is something that's necessary, if that's what you're asking, whether in the now or in the, I don't know, for your spiritual, rest is important, but also for your physical. We are human beings, we get tired, and I guess if you're asking for biblical principles, I would say for you to be loving to the people that you are serving, whether at church, whether at work, you do need to be well rested. And yeah, so that plays a very big role. I'm not sure if I'm just being tangent to your question or I'm just moving away.
No, thanks. I think you did answer it. Thank you.
Are you sure?
Yep. I'll follow up if I have any follow up, but I look forward to my chocolates. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? Going.
Just a question.
Yes, Munzan.
Was David, like, I didn't get that part. Was David wrong to eat that bread that was for, like, was it technically wrong in doing that? I didn't, maybe, yeah, I didn't get that part. Where there was an example at the beginning there where it speaks about David when he was hungry, he with those that were with him, he entered the house of God and ate and the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but priests. Was he wrong to give it to his to eat for himself and to give to his companions?
Good question. If I don't answer the question faithfully, I do trust that there are people here who can help me with that. But I think from what we get in the book of Luke, Jesus is saying that bread was meant for the priest, right? It was meant only for the priest. But if you go back to First Samuel, you're gonna find something that was really interesting, that there is a differentiation between the priesthood and the kings, and God has distinguished those two things in a way that when Saul decided to act as a priest, God really punished him, and he got dethroned for that. We know the story, and I forget the other king who actually took the priest rules and was doing that. So basically, there was that big separation between the two, between the priest and so the line of the priest and the king. Whereas when we see David here, he's not in any of those two. So the two things were not supposed to mix at all, and God was clear on that. But when we see David, he's not in between. He's in between these two things. He's not a king. He's not a priest. He's just a man who is going to the house of God for sanctuary and for provision, and he finds provision there. Now, I think with what the Bible tells us, it was unlawful for David to eat that bread. As I was doing my research, as I was saying, there's a lot of thinking around that, and some people actually do say that David was justified for the bread that he was given. I'm not too sure if the other cross references say that, but it was something that it was the bread that was to, how does it put it? I always think it's quiche, so it wasn't. So they would replace this ink, right? They would replace that bread, and David got that bread that it was being replaced, and so that is why technically he wasn't wrong. But the bread that he was still eating was still lawful only for the priest to eat.
Cool. No, I get it. So it's like after the communion at church and having the grape juice. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you can say something. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
I think Ben has a question.
There's another question here.
Ben has a question.
You posted to everyone. I got a direct message question. Let me see. Yeah, you mentioned fasting and then not doing it. So is that also for us now? Fasting and them not doing it. So, and then the question is that for us now?
Well, to be honest, my passage doesn't touch on that. What I was trying to show, I'm going to get to the answer, but what I was trying to show there is what Jesus was talking about. So there was this hustle between Jesus and the Pharisees, how his disciples were feasting, and while the Pharisees' disciples and John's disciples were fasting. We get that just right above before today's passage. And so Jesus' answer is, if I may read it for you, it says, can you make the friends of a bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. They will fast in those days. Okay, so without getting too into context and just running away from answering the question directly. So that's what Jesus was talking about. He was saying the Pharisees were his disciples were justified for actually feasting and celebrating because he was still around. And so he's pointing to something greater. He's saying there's going to come a time whereby he would leave them and he will be taken away from them. And then in that time, they would fast in those days. That's what verses 35 of chapter 5 says.
Answered, Kwazi.
Somebody said very helpful answer. So yeah, I answered. Thank you. I was reading from the chat, so yeah.
Ben, did you have a question?
Ben, question. Oh, he's sorted. He's sorted. Thank you, Sponga. We still have some time, so if there are any questions, we can take a few more.
Yes, I've got a question.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, verse 9, can you clarify the significance of Jesus's question? Was he trying to trick them, or was he trying to, or like what message was he trying to get across with this question when he says, I ask you which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?
Yeah, I suppose it would be worth looking at what Jesus' definition of what's good. What does he mean when he says what's good? So he goes on to demonstrate it, right? He goes on to restore the men's arm. So according to Jesus, that was something that was good, which the Pharisees seemed not to be concerned about it. If you read throughout the book of Luke, you're gonna see a lot of instances whereby the Pharisees are in Jesus' case because he'd done something. We see a man who was healed by the pool of Bethesda, and they see him and they're like, whoa, why are you carrying this or your mat at the Sabbath? You're not supposed to do this. And the man seemed not to care because Jesus had delivered him. We see a lot of these things whereby Jesus heals someone, and instead of them being concerned about that, they're just worried about why is he breaking the Sabbath, or why is Jesus breaking the Sabbath, or is that man breaking the Sabbath? So Jesus was just redirecting their understanding. It was whatever he was doing something that was good. Good. I think we know that when Jesus is performing his miracles, there is a now context whereby he's doing that, but it's also pointing to something that is to come, whether after the cross or eternity. As we see here, he's restoring this man's arm, which is pointing to something that's way, way greater. If you read, I think Matthew is a bit more structured than Luke. Matthew says, when Jesus is asking them, he says, if you had a ship that had fallen off the cliff, would you leave it because it's the Sabbath, or you would go and actually save it? Jesus was showing that salvation for man was way greater than the rule itself. The rule itself was made so that it could serve men. As I said earlier, this was designed by God to give rest to men, not to burden them. But the Pharisees had kept this rule so much that you now can't do anything, even if you were doing something that's good, but you can't do it because it's Sabbath. And they had ridiculous laws, actually. You couldn't carry something that was heavy, you couldn't walk for a certain distance, you couldn't do some other things. In a manner that even if you were sick, that didn't matter. As long as you didn't break the Sabbath, that was okay. So do you see how this is now burdening people? Instead of caring for people whom God has entrusted them to serve and to faithfully shepherd, they are now caring more about keeping the rule, keeping the Sabbath, and that was in their priority. So I hope this just answer your question.
Yeah, yes, it does.
Thank you, Sibonga. One last person, if you have a question. Anyone? Question? Okay.